In my last ReactOS video, I said that you can't install the OS from a USB without modifying the ISO image. What I meant by modifying the ISO image, I meant modifying some files on the USB. Apparently ReactOS can install from USB without modifying files, but so far I've not gotten it to work. Before I mess around with USB booting though, I got a correction to make. In the video, I installed the chipset driver, but it did nothing. Well, it turns out I actually installed the wrong chipset driver. I installed the Intel mobile driver. I should have installed the Intel GM96 chipset driver. I guess I got the files mixed up and did not notice. Installing the correct driver breaks the entire system, as it blue screens on every boot. It gives me the error, the video driver failed to initialize. So maybe it was best that I installed the wrong driver. Anyway, back to the topic of USB booting. Since the ReactOS install is now bricked, I wanted to try and reinstall it via USB. Now, USB booting on ReactOS has never worked for me. It does boot and starts loading system drivers, but then it just hangs on a black screen. I did learn some things about ReactOS and USB. ReactOS does not like USB 3.0 very much, but the Dell Inspiron 1525 only has USB 2.0 ports, and the flash drive I'm using is also USB 2.0, so that should not be an issue. This flash drive is actually just as old as the laptop itself. It dates back to at least 2008 or 2010. I followed the first method on the ReactOS wiki. I wrote the image to the USB using Rufus, as apparently USB booting has a higher chance of working using this tool. I then downloaded this zip file which contains all the files needed to get ReactOS to boot via RAM disk. I copied over all the files to the USB, replacing the original files that came from the ISO, except inboot.c32 as that caused some issues. I then copied over both the boot CD image and the live CD image from the latest release, and renamed the files to bootcd.iso and livecd.iso. This makes ReactOS bootable from a RAM disk. And well, I did get a bit further, but the boot CD, which is the install CD, doesn't boot. It just hangs on a black screen and then blue screens, with an error message that says, a critical kernel security check failed. But the live CD actually works just fine, and I can boot to the desktop. Then I got the idea to just write the live CD to the USB without modifying anything. First, I wrote the image using Rufus on Windows, and well, it booted just fine. I then tried DD on Debian to write the image, and well, that worked too. So the issue is the boot CD. The live CD works just fine. The method I used to write it to the USB drive doesn't matter. So, something with the boot CD just doesn't work. I tried some other methods on the ReactOS wiki, and none of those worked either. I did try looking in the BIOS for any settings, but there's only 2 settings relating to USB, and those disable USB completely, so that's no good. I even tried other USB drives, but I got the same issues as before. The last thing I tried was a nightly build, and I got the same results. I pretty much tried everything I could. This just might be some kind of limitation with the boot CD, or maybe it's the hardware, I'm not sure. So I gave up on USB booting for now, but this is not the end. So I'm gonna move on from USB booting and try some other things that I didn't test in the last video. I was told that there was a newer version of the chipset driver from 2009, as the version from Dell's website was from 2008. Trouble is, this driver was written for Windows 7, and drivers written for Windows 7 tend not to be backwards compatible with Windows XP or Server 2003. So the likelihood of a driver written for Windows 7 to work on a Windows Server 2003 based system is very slim, but I gave it a shot anyway to see what would happen. To my surprise, it did run, and the driver installed. But it had the same issue as before. It blue screens on boot with the same video driver failed to initialize error. So that's that. Next, I was told to use Snappy Driver Installer. Now I have tried this in the past, and Snappy Driver Installer Lite is in the ReactOS application manager, but it doesn't work. It gives me the error, device requires a driver but it wasn't found in the driver packs. I also tried Snappy Driver Installer Origin and I got the same issue. I've only used Snappy Driver Installer on ReactOS. I've never tried it on Windows. It seems like a good tool though, if your hardware is supported that is. Now I'm going to test one more thing before I end this video. ReactOS can natively run DOS programs. No DOSBox emulation required. This is a feature I completely forgot about. So I tested this feature with the game Mario War, which is a fan-made Mario DOS game. This is the game that inspired Super Mario War, which is one of the greatest Mario fan games of all time. The game runs perfectly, though I can't seem to full screen DOS applications. Super Mario War does run as well, for anyone wondering. It's even playable in full screen, so that's a win. I did not bother testing other DOS games, but maybe I'll test GTA 1 and 2 at some point. That would be nice because GTA 1's Windows port is completely broken, but GTA 2's Windows port still runs on Windows 10 and 11. I know for a fact Doom will run, so no need to try that. It runs on everything. So that's about everything I wanted to show. I'm really happy with this new release of ReactOS, and hopefully in the future with more development, the chipset/graphics driver and audio will start working. Once those are working, as well as getting a modern browser to run, then I'd say ReactOS could be a usable replacement for Windows XP on older devices like this, and maybe even modern systems too. But at the moment, I'd stick to Linux distributions, as ReactOS still has a long way to go. This will be my last ReactOS video for now, but if any major developments happen soon, maybe I'll make another video on it. Anyway, that was my update on ReactOS.